Today, some of our best segments from the global lane. Israeli families are anxiously awaiting the return of the remaining hostages. I recently spoke with Pastor Andrew Brunson, who spent 2 years in a Turkish prison before his release in 2018. He wrote about his experience in the book God's Hostage. What are your thoughts when you see these hostage families and you see the hostage release, and what would you like to see happen there?
When I see the reunions, it really moves me because I remember just the desperation, the desperate longing I had for freedom and to be with my family. And so then I see these people coming together after not knowing if they'll ever see each other again. And I know what they're feeling. Now, I also remember what broke me, because I did break in my imprisonment, and then God rebuilt me in my second year. But it's the uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen, if I would ever be released, the fear, which is very overwhelming, and also isolation. And I think those are the same things that many of them are experiencing. And I think especially uncertainty was devouring me. And it's very difficult to deal with not knowing what's going to happen, if you will ever get out, if you'll ever see your loved ones again, or if you'll die in that situation. And that's what really tests the heart, I think.
I think last time we met, you talked about feeling distant from God.
I felt abandoned by God. During those 2 years, I lost a sense of God's presence. And I think that was part of the testing that God was allowing me to go through, is what will I do when the feelings of love for God are under pressure? And it's no longer emotions. It's much easier to feel good about God when I'm experiencing His love. And what happens when I don't have His presence? Am I still going to love Him when I don't see His love? Am I still going to be faithful when I don't see His faithfulness in a practical way?
Well, how about these hostage families? I mean, it's got to be, look, these are God's chosen people. I don't know, some of them may be faithful. I'm sure many of them turned to God that time. Can you imagine what they're going through and what they're experiencing, not knowing, and maybe even blaming God? Is that something that happens? Do you blame God for what happens to you?
It's hard not to. And this is something that happens not only in desperate situations like imprisonment or being a hostage, but people go through this when they go into a crisis. We blame God. And especially for those of us who are believers, we say, God, why aren't you intervening? This is the problem of suffering, right? If God is all-powerful and He's loving. And I had to make a conscious decision to repeat again and again, no, God, you are faithful. You do love me, even if I don't feel it, even if I don't see it. You are good. You are true. And to say these things, even when my emotions are in turmoil and in darkness, but with my will, I can choose to speak what is true.
You worked 23 years in Turkey, 2 years in prison there, so I think you know the culture and the society very well. You probably are very familiar with Erdogan. He recently met with al-Jilani, the new leader of Syria. So what do you think he's up to? Does he want to reestablish an Ottoman Empire, or is he just trying to gain influence with Syria?
Well, I don't know that they can reestablish the Ottoman Empire, but certainly there is going to be influence. And I think we're going to see in the next years, especially with some decline in the U.S., just the geopolitical situation is going to change. And I think you'll see regional powers that are going to begin to exert themselves more. And Turkey is a regional power. It ruled the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans not so long ago. And so I think that remains there. They're starting to spread their influence into areas where they ruled before.
And then recently we saw King Abdullah of Jordan welcoming al-Jilani to Jordan. So what's going on here? Are we seeing a new alliance maybe of Jordan, Syria, and Turkey against Israel or against Iran?
My sense is that I think that Turkey, Russia, and Iran will move together in some alliance. I know that's counterintuitive. They generally have not been friends before. I had a dream about this in prison that was from God. I have very few dreams from God, but this was one. And I saw them moving in a dark alliance. This was in 2016, before they started to move together. And then it started to happen. And so I think there are spiritual ties there. So I don't know what will happen with Jordan. They're going to be under tremendous pressure right now. But I think there is an alliance that will continue in a darker direction, and that will it will eventually, in the end, try to undermine Israel. Yes, I think we're just going into a more turbulent world. I think one of the things we do when we visit, because we're still involved in the Muslim world, and when I talk to Christians there, I say I know that there's pressure now of persecution, but I'm sorry to say it's going to increase in the future. And this is because the West is pulling back from a value for religious freedom. Religious freedom is under pressure in the West itself, and so they're no longer going to defend it in other countries. And this means that pressure will rise in many places overseas.
Andrew Brunson, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Since October 7th, anti-Semitic acts have skyrocketed in the United Kingdom. Great Britain is no longer a safe haven for the Jewish people, and most British Jews have considered leaving the country. Dale Hurd brings us the story from London.
This is the United Kingdom that British Jews experience today.
Zionists, they are filthy animals.
Like obedient sheep, you obey Israel.
The whole condemning Hamas, I'm not going to condemn them, and Israel doesn't exist.
Most British Jews now no longer believe they have a future here. Recent polling has also found that most Jews hide their Jewishness in public and do not feel welcome in the United Kingdom. Gideon Falter is chief executive of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which commissioned the poll and has been documenting the rising Jew hatred.
A lot of people have talked about whether they have a future in this country. Do I think the Jewish community in the UK is going to evaporate? No. But I do think there is a sizable conversation now happening within the community of people saying, okay, is this the place that we've got a future?
There were nearly 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents reported in the first half of 2024, the highest number ever recorded for a 6-month period. 9 out of 10 British Jews say the government is not doing enough to stop the violence and discrimination.
I know some who have left. I know some who are actively, seriously looking at leaving.
Jewish investigative journalist David Collier tells us he constantly feels the anti-Jewish hate.
I get death threats every single day, but I'm also being contacted by Jews either who are having trouble at work, at home, students.
What brings you both out here today?
Well, just the amount of anti-Semitism we've had in Oxford for the past year has been really awful. We've had swastikas, we've had Jews being accused of weaponising anti-Semitism.
We've been told we're not welcome at the university.
Yeah, and it just...
down streets.
It's been escalating, and this is the big message. It's about the escalation, you know, it's getting gradually worse.
This in a nation where the adopted national song is Jerusalem. In the song Jerusalem, the British sing, "We will not cease till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." But this Judeo-Christian connection that goes back centuries has begun to fray. Surveys show British Jews consider Islamists to be the most serious threat. And in a close second is the far left. Falter adds the nation's young people are being indoctrinated against Jews.
They are becoming radicalized on the internet. They are imbibing bigotries that their parents themselves don't have. And then they're teaching this from one kid to another kid. We've got a generation which is extremely hateful, and not just hateful, They're extremists.
David Collier is afraid demographics have already decided the future course of Britain's Jews. The most popular name for baby boys in Britain today is Mohammed.
It's a completely different country. The entire dynamic has changed, the entire atmosphere has changed, both towards Israel and in extension towards the Jewish community. It's completely different. It's a different country with a different demographic, a different outlook. Everything about it is different. You're talking to these Jewish people, and you know that things are only going to get worse for them, not better. There's no way back for the United Kingdom from this point.
Dale joins us with more. Dale, during his speech in Munich, Germany, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said nothing is more urgent than mass migration. In many European countries, mass migration is at an all-time high. And Vance suggested the recent car-ramming terrorist attack in Munich was a result of unvetted migration.
How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants.
So, Dale, you reported extensively on Brexit and European voter concerns about immigration. To what extent has mass migration caused this dramatic rise in anti-Semitism in Britain?
It's the number one driver. As I say in the story, the most popular name for baby boys in Britain now is Mohammed. But it's interesting that in the view of Jews who were polled about this, right behind Muslim immigrants is the far left in Britain. They're close behind Muslims as a source of anti-Semitism. And then most disturbing is it's spreading among British young people. And I think young people in a lot of nations, they're spreading lies and conspiracy theories over things like TikTok. And it's become sort of an indoctrination academy online for anti-Semitism.
And few of the Munich attendees applauded Vance. Why is that? What don't they understand about mass unvetted immigration?
Well, I can give you three reasons. The first one is, while Vance was standing up for democratic values, they saw him as fomenting revolution, which in a sense he is. He is telling people what they already suspected, what many of them are already disgusted by. The other reason is virtually none of these elites live near migrants. They're insulated from it completely behind fences. And thirdly, Europe and Britain are still under this spell, this fear of being called a racist, and that's like the worst thing, and it sticks, even if it's not true. And so they're like paralyzed. They don't want to do anything about it and be called a racist.
Well, then how likely will we see a reversal of anti-Semitism and the mass migration policy in Europe? What will it take?
I think two different issues. I don't think the Jews I talked to were all extremely pessimistic that the situation would not change. And I am not suggesting this, but I think the only way it could change would be to remove some of the Muslim migrants from Britain, for instance. Migration as a whole in Europe is going to change. It's a certainty, and it's going to take a right-wing government. Voters know it. They've been told, don't vote for the right wing. You're a bad person if you do. But the center and the left will not address the problem, and that's why right-wing governments are inevitable in Europe.
Right-wing rising in Europe. Okay, Dale Hurd, CBN News senior correspondent, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
After a federal judge temporarily blocked President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship, Vice President J.D. Vance asserted that the administration will not back down from the fight. During an appearance on Face the Nation, he argued that birthright citizenship should only apply to lawful permanent residents or legal immigrants who intend to reside in the United States.
If you come here on vacation and you have a baby in an American hospital, that baby doesn't become an American citizen. If you're an illegal alien and you come here temporarily, hopefully, your child does not become an American citizen by virtue of just having been born on American soil.
Joining us to discuss more on the issue of birthright citizenship and the legal battle ahead is Dr. John Eastman. He's senior fellow at the Claremont Institute. Dr. Eastman, it seems that much of the legal debate about citizenship and the 14th Amendment centers around the idea of jurisdiction. In your recent article, you suggested it's more about allegiance than jurisdiction. Explain, please.
Well, the drafters of that amendment were asked directly what they meant by subject to the jurisdiction, because there were two ideas that were covered by that phrase. One that was called partial or territorial jurisdiction. If you live within our borders, unless you're a diplomat, then you're obviously subject to our laws while here. And they were asked if that's what they intended, and they specifically said no. It means subject to the complete jurisdiction, owing allegiance, such as exists among citizens, or the Supreme Court would later say for lawful permanent residents who are permanently domiciled in this country. Not for temporary visitors, whether they're here legally on a student or tourist or work visa, and certainly not for those who are here illegally without our consent at all. And that was quite clear that that's what they meant, and it remained clear that that's what they meant for 3/4 of a century. Somehow it just kind of worked into our nation's psyche that if you're just born here, that's all that's necessary, and that's never what that amendment said or intended.
Well, it was 150 years ago. So what was the original intent then of Congress when the 14th Amendment was proposed?
Well, it was very clear. They were codifying the 1866 Civil Rights Act, and that one specifically said, born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power. So if you're visiting here, the word they used was temporary sojourners. If you're a temporary sojourner and you still owe your allegiance to a foreign power, your king or the emperor of China or whatever, then this clause does not give you your children automatic citizenship. They were very clear about that. Now, we didn't have illegal immigration at the time. The question arose in the context of Native Americans who owed allegiance to a different power, their tribes. And the drafters of that language were quite clear. Even though they're born on U.S. soil, they would not be citizens. Supreme Court held as much in an 1884 case called Elk versus Wilkins. So this was the clear understanding, and it remained that understanding. I've not been able to trace exactly when this understanding changed, but it wasn't anything formal. It was either in the late 1930s or maybe as late as the 1960s that government officials started acting as though anybody born here, no matter what, were citizens.
What other cases came before the Supreme Court on this issue, and how did they rule?
The first case that took up 14th Amendment at all was called the Slaughterhouse cases. And there, both the majority justices and the minority justices said quite clearly that the clause was intended to protect, not to give citizenship to the children of diplomats. Everybody agrees on that. And then it said, or the children of foreign nationals, citizens of another nation. And that's what we're talking about. Elk versus Wilkins did the same thing a decade later. Wong Kim Ark is the case often cited for changing the rule that if you're just born on U.S. soil, you're a citizen. But Wong Kim Ark involved parents who were permanently domiciled in the United States, and the court said their children are therefore citizens. It had nothing to say about children of illegal immigrants or children of temporary visitors. That was not at issue. And then we get, people now look at Wong Kim Ark as if it settled the question. It clearly did not. And had it settled the question, 20-some years later, in 1924, Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act, offering citizenship to every Native American born in the country. That would not have been necessary if the Supreme Court had already settled that question in the Wong Kim Ark case.
Well, everyone expects this to eventually work its way up to the Supreme Court, but what are the chances Congress may weigh in on this and propose new legislation? If so, wouldn't that likely be challenged in the courts?
Well, Congress would adopt the same understanding as President Trump's executive order. And then you're all of a sudden looking at a court decision where both political branches have weighed in on their understanding of the Constitution. And these are co-equal branches, and they each have independent obligation to enforce the Constitution. So that would make for a very interesting legal challenge when the political branches and say, look, Eastman and the other scholars that have looked at this stuff and said we've been misinterpreting the Constitution for about a half a century. The original first century after the 14th Amendment was adopted, that's not what we did. And going back to the original meaning and, ending things like birth tourism. I mean, our main political enemies on the world stage Russians going to Miami to have born babies and then go back to Russia with a citizen certificate, or Chinese immigrants coming, Chinese mothers coming and renting luxury hotel rooms for a month until they deliver their baby and go back with the holy grail of American citizenship. This is nonsense. And I think President Trump understands it's nonsense. And because, in my view, it's not compelled by the Constitution, he can do something about it.
Dr. John Eastman of the Claremont Institute, thank you for sharing your insights. We appreciate it. In this era of self-service, many stores and businesses have reduced costs by eliminating cashiers and installing do-it-yourself checkouts. Similarly, a church in Lucerne, Switzerland, has removed the need for a priest in the confessional. Now, Catholics can enter the confessional with their rosaries and recite 10 Hail Marys with the help of AI Jesus.
Hello, Jesus. Do you have some advice for us in this time?
In these challenging times, remember that in the face of adversity, love and faith are your steadfast guides. Just as I calm the stormy seas, so too can peace be found within your heart. Amidst life's tempests, let kindness and compassion steer your course.
Folks, do you see where this is headed? Who needs the real God when AI Jesus seems to have all the answers? It's almost like a biblical version of Siri or Alexa. However, the one true God offers us something much better, a personal relationship with Him. AI Jesus is not personal. It merely regurgitates pre-programmed words of Jesus found in the Bible. So what is missing in all of this? The Holy Spirit. You cannot receive His guidance digitally. This only happens through prayer, reading the Bible, seeking Him, and following His direction. Yes, AI Jesus can be a tool used by God to draw people closer to Him. However, let's not depend on this digital image of God created by humans, instead of turning to the one and only God who created humankind. Innocent intentions can easily evolve into idolatry. Remember, only through the blood sacrifice of Jesus do we have the promise of eternal life. AI Jesus cannot provide that. Only God can bring us what we long for: salvation, true love, and peace. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.